event-filled school. I think you're going to enjoy tonight. We have Mick McConnell, who's, for me, a model of what I like to call a transdisciplinary architect, someone who is absolutely trained in the discipline, undergraduate degrees, graduate degrees in architecture at solid architecture schools, but has gone on through a kind of set of opportunities to pursue architecture in other modes. So I think he's discovering a little bit of what Alex Wall earlier today called the near future of the profession, and discovering that the kinds of skills and knowledge and intensity and breadth of ability and digital aptitudes and so on that architects must have today and necessarily have today can find audiences and projects well beyond the normal bounds of professional practice as defined legally in our society. So Mick started out studying architecture in of all places, Nebraska, at one of the really great Midwestern schools that has a wonderful tradition of professional training and aesthetic and theoretical exploration. Did a little side journey to study at SciArc, and began his career at HOK of all places. But even at HOK, which we think of as the solid core of corporate practice these days, he found a opportunity there to work in marketing for the firm. I think he called it digital or guerrilla marketing. So attempts to innovatively find new clients and new projects for a firm that was perceived as staid and ordinary and big. And from there, I'm trying not to look at my crib sheet, but I'm going to have to because I can't remember. I thought I had it memorized. Went on to start up Architectonica's New York office to work on a sports facility. Skills he also had become familiar with at HOK. Then began to take one of the detours that really characterized his career to work for Peter Arnell and the Arnell Group on various kinds of branding and marketing. And even as early as 1999, the internet is really in its infancy, or at least adolescence, started up an internet site that for its time was really a kind of prototype for social networking, not simply an informational site like so many of the early websites. So, and of course we know Arnell is also trained as an architect and someone who's found a way to take that kind of synthetic and technical thinking into the world of media and advertising and branding. He founded his own company, which he ran for a while, McConnell and Company. Went off to teach back at Nebraska for a while, so he's got an academic experience as well. Then returned to the world of architecture. Roger Ferris worked for that firm for 2 or 3 years, and then at Asymptote. Of course, you all know Asymptote is one of the more adventurous and digitally sophisticated firms working today, and worked on projects in Dubai, right? Yeah, okay. You lived in Dubai? Dubai for a couple of years working on a single project, went to work for Starbucks. I won't try to say what you did there, but amazing move from Asymptote to Starbucks. Worked for Thomas Leeser for a while, another very adventurous architect. And then back into the world of branding and marketing with Interbrand, and now as creative director at RGA, really exploring the kind of physical material environments that an advertising and branding firm needs to move into, moving beyond the digital and the media world of branding and advertising, and finding a foothold for that firm in really the world of architecture, but the world of architecture nested with or coupled with the world of marketing and advertising. So an amazing trajectory or circuitous path, and like I say, I think really interesting guy who I hope many of our students will aspire to similarly exciting paths in the way they take their degrees. So welcome to Mick McConnell.
Thanks, Mark. Is the mic on? Can you guys hear me okay back there? Well, that was a great introduction. I like just hearing my own resume, he starts to think I might have bounced around a lot, but I'll talk about the evolution and how I got to that point, those points along the way, and how it's affected the work that I do and where I'm at and what I'm currently up to these days. When I was asked to give a title for the lecture, I was told if you don't have a specific title for the lecture, everyone just puts recent work. So I was thinking about it briefly, and I thought, you know, maybe it's just works, because there's a kind of double meaning there. So it's the works that I'm working on, but it's also, I like the sound of, or the idea of seeing the flyer in the hall that just says Mick McConnell Works, because I feel like there's been 20 years of lots of work for a lot of different people, obviously. The other thing I thought was interesting was this idea of maybe the lecture title should be called Number 2. And I know it sounds tongue-in-cheek, but I think there's some validity to it, which I'll talk about later, and that is, who's Mick McConnell? You guys don't. Most people don't know who Mick McConnell is. I understand that. That's fine. But I've worked for a lot of great architects as the kind of guy on the ground making sure that these great projects happen. So there's, and I'll walk through some of these, Yaz Hotel, or a mall in Bangkok for Thomas Leeser, or an arena, American Airlines arena for Architectonica, all projects that are significant projects, serious projects with some, well, arguably if you're not an Architectonica fan, but serious projects with a serious design standard behind it. And so the number 2 is this idea of how do you talk about what that means to be that guy, the guy on the ground, the person on the ground that's getting these projects built, getting these projects to see the light of day, and what it takes. So this is the list of what it takes. I'm just kidding, it's not really the list. But today I'm going to talk about a couple of these projects and how they relate to kind of where I am today, which is more digital than just architecture, but there's a definite relationship, and the kind of information behind what we use to generate the kind of digital solutions and the kind of physical ramifications of these digital solutions that kind of permeates in a lot of this work. So again, who's Mick McConnell? You can hear it from Mark, you can Tumblr, WordPress, LinkedIn, it's all there, right? So the only things I can tell you about me that aren't already known is I was born in Burlington the same year Saturn V launched. I moved around a lot growing up. My father was an engineer, my mother was an interior designer. I think that played a big part in how I ended up doing what I'm doing. And then where I lived and the percentage of where I lived I think is important, because that starts to shape the not just the path and the kind of design decisions that I made by the environment that I was in, but the people that I met. So I really think where my design decisions started taking a serious change was when I went to SCI-Arc, which was in 1992. All of the work up until 1992, I was in my master's program, was idealistic. I was studying decon, was loving that work and reading Derrida and doing that work. But in 1992, I was in Los Angeles for the riots, and the work suddenly changed. Because we were no longer looking at rotating a building on the axis of a cul-de-sac down the street or pointing to the ocean or something. It suddenly became about real issues like sustainability, not gray water sustainability, but how to make cities habitable, and how do you enrich the lives of those in a neighborhood? Because this was a situation that occurred. Arguably, some took advantage of the situation, but it happened for a reason, and it was the conditions that they felt they were living in. And the conditions that they felt they were living in was key, I think. Not just the conditions that they were in, but how do you make people understand the environment they're in, better their environment, and listen to them. So this idea of population or crowdsourcing information, this data collection to find out really what people want and what people need became important to my study and to my interest from that point forward. So I did a lot of the work at SCI-Arc with a lot of great architects, and at the end of the program, Aaron Betsky suggested that I put together a book on the experience. So I created, I edited and wrote a piece called The Los Angeles Experiment, which was a collection of essays by all these young architects at the time. In 1992, Hanny had published one article, I think, and Laurie Hawkinson and Smith Miller. Levius was still doing his early books, and it was an interesting piece about the project response to the riots and what that meant to Los Angeles. But it also is where I created these relationships with people and how I ended up where I got to. So that crazy resume, there's some solid threads in that crazy resume. So the bar on your left is SCI-Arc, and the bar across the top is my architecture career, and the mess in the middle is the digital architectural overlap in between. I won't go through every name, but a lot of the overlap occurred because of connections that I made with people that I really aspired to be or work with, mainly through Hanny and Lee Sand. I started working with Hanny and Lee Sand back in '96, doing some freelance work for them, and that actually led to some work with a student of theirs named Jeff Mancini, who also trained as an architect, never went into the profession after he freelanced for Hanny and Lee Sand. He graduated from Columbia in '94 and did the film route, which a lot of people did, working on renderings and production for film. And then he subsequently went on to Arnell Group, how I ended up at Arnell Group, freelancing for Arnell, and we started a .com together. And then he ended up at Interbrand and at RGA, so the Mancini connection was really strong. But what was interesting was how the overlap really occurred. So Hanny and Thomas Lace are really good friends, and I did projects for both of them, both for Sheikh Mohammed. So this is a quick glance, but it explains the trajectories through Mark's explanation of my circuitous background. There actually were some pretty significant overlap in how I ended up where I ended up. I can blame a structural engineer for a lot of it too. Tom Scarangello was a big factor. So the work was varied because of that diagonal grid that you saw. So for the last 20 years, I've done everything from corporate work, sports work, a lot of sports entertainment work, to industrial design for Mattel and packaging design for Mattel on a couple projects, as well as residential work, a lot of residential work. Anything I needed to do to keep involved in the profession, but also expanding in this idea of keeping these contacts and working with the people that I wanted to work with. And also keeping the digital going. So this is a little side thing that I developed a fish recognition software for an aquarium project, which allowed you to put a one-way mirror behind the tank, and the fish could be seen, and you could then collect all the data by the patterns of the fish. That was one of my first forays into kind of pattern recognition, which we'll talk about in other projects, and using kind of smart information gathering. So there's a much more in-depth project around that. So I was doing all of this work for years. This is not all of it, obviously. This is a very small smidgen of work. When in 2007, Hanny called me back after working on Guggenheim.com with him before and a couple book projects with him before. And he called me back and said, I've won this project in Korea. It's a crazy project. I've only done a coffee shop and a cultural center in Holland, nothing big. I need help. So I had done a few towers in my day, working for some of the corporate firms. And so he hired me to take over this project in Busan, Korea, which we're not going to go into today, but it explains how I got there. So I flew to Korea on my second day of work with Hanny, and while I was in Korea, we submitted drawings for a project in Abu Dhabi, and we won a competition. It was a 5-day charrette competition for Sheikh Mohammed. And I flew directly from Korea to Abu Dhabi and began working on Yaz Viceroy. That was November 21st. By December 1st, I had moved to Abu Dhabi. So it was a pretty crazy time in my life. That flexibility, I think, is very important. So the project, I don't know if anyone knows much about this, but Abu Dhabi was awarded an F1 expansion track for 2009 launch. And Sheikh Mohammed had seen a rendering of what was being done on Yaz Island. Yaz Island is one of the little islands just to the north of the star. And it's actually it's an existing island. What you see is now a channel, was a lot of wetlands. It wasn't necessarily a navigatable island. It is now. This island was completely barren with just some mangroves up to the left there. And Sheikh Mohammed had seen a rendering of a proposal for the track, which was already awarded to Abu Dhabi, and saw that there was a hotel proposed for this point of the tightest turn. And it was an elliptical hotel, and it was floating in the middle. And he said, no way are we having that. It looked like just a plain suburban Holiday Inn in the middle of the track. So he had a short list, fast and furious competition to 5 firms, and Asymptote was one of them, because we were doing a condominium project in Raha Beach, which is south, which never got built. So like I said, I was in Busan, we won the competition. We won the competition based on a very simple idea, and the idea was that we took the existing planned ellipse and we just rotated it 90 degrees, put it in the water, and put a bridge between the two, and we presented it in such a way that it's great architecture, but it's also buildable because you have 20 months. So the concept won over because they liked what they saw, but they also believed it was the most doable. There were some MVRDV solutions and stuff, which were also great solutions, but would require complete re-engineering of the building. And at the time that we won the competition, we were told this building was completely engineered. So we could use the slabs, use the structure, and move forward. So that was November 21st, and by December 6th, we began piling. Piling is laying the foundation of the building. By December 20th, we learned that the structural system had never been engineered past schematic design. So we had to move very quickly, as you can imagine, because we were already building. The other thing that we learned quickly was that we couldn't just mirror the ellipse into the water, because Sheikh Mohammed was building the largest yacht in the world, and it would not be able to turn around in the water. So we had to actually move the building closer to land, but we couldn't because the track was already planned, and re-engineering the track would take too much time. So we actually had to come up with an entirely new core and structural system for Tower B. This is Tower B, then Tower A. So not only did we have to do new engineering for Tower A, but we had to come up with a whole new system for Tower B. So I was living in a hotel, sketching cores and plans and showing them to the client daily and getting things approved daily, while also trying to maintain a room count of 500 keys and dealing with all of the specifics with the marina and the racetrack team and the rest of the island team. So, so this project was moving quickly. Hanny likes to talk about this project when he talks about this project in terms of architecture and speed, and that the design has evolved from the notion of the Formula One car moving quickly around the hairpin turn, and that this is a shadow of the motion. I like to talk about in speed in terms of what a number 2 would think of for speed, and that is what it took to get this building built. So we had absolutely no time, and I think that was our saving grace for this project, because we had absolutely no time. We were now up to 19 months to opening, and we were in construction, and we had nothing on paper that could be built yet. So things moved very fast. And as the director on the job, I had to act quickly to make sure that this could happen. So the egos had to be put aside, and we had to do whatever it takes. So we actually hired 110 professionals on site in the desert, and over 6 architecture firms and 7 engineering firms, and 2 lighting firms and 2 graphic design firms and 2 landscape firms, whatever it took to get it done. So we had a structural engineer just doing the grid shell, another structural engineer just doing marina works. We had structural engineers separate for A and B since they were different systems. We didn't want them to have to be conflicting on the systems. We had a different structural engineer for just all of the additional facilities. This is a parking garage underground here. These 2 bridges here, and there's a bridge over here that's hidden by the view. This one. So it's very, very complex, and things were changing and happening fast. Changing and happening fast in terms of details and specifics, but the overall design really held on to its own, again, because of the time. At one point, we had a meeting where I was explaining to them that there's 5,200 glass panels on this thing, and not one is the same. If 2 are the same, it's by accident. We didn't design it that way. They were designed to be all manufactured and just laser etched and numbered, so that we could then determine placement of these. And just so give you an idea of scale of some of these panels, some of these large panels are 4 by 2 meters. So they're massive panels. It's just when you see it on the overall building, you don't realize how big these things really are. So what we had to do was we hired 2 different facade consultants for this project, front facades, and also Schley Bergerman, which is an engineering company that does grid shells. And they ended up actually working with Wagner Bureau directly on direct contract for construction of this as well. There were a lot of odd overlaps on this project and how it worked. But we began working immediately on how this grid shell actually gets built. And how do you standardize components on a non-standard design and move quickly? So we immediately identified that the only way we could standardize things is joints and connections, but the glass panels had to remain separate. So all of the angles of the glass panels are the same, and it's the dog legs that change. So every corner has the same kind of radius and angle, but we just changed the length of the panel, so the diamonds stretch longer. It was a way that we could do it. So we then had to remodel it again once we had optimized that. So we hired Gary Technologies. They set up an office in the desert with us in the trailer, and we had 4 guys from Gary Tech just doing the modeling of the grid shell, as well as the modeling of the works to hold up this grid shell during construction. So we like to say it's a self-sustaining or self-supported grid shell. They always love the term self-supported because it has this air that it's holding itself up, which it's not being held up by itself. It's being held up by these giant columns the size of buses. But the speed at which we had to design the building, we also had to design the most complex scaffolding system that these guys had ever done to hold up this grid shell during construction, and also to create a span that would span the racetrack so they could build the racetrack at the same time, and also span the bridge so they could install the bridge at the same time as the grid shell. I mean, it's really complex. So that affected how we built things. So we had to build the bridge in such a way that also could accommodate this change and this time schedule. So, you know, Anish Kapoor's Bean in Chicago. We had a 3D curved metal panel system here, and we didn't know how to get this built in time. We found out that we only had a 12-week window for construction of the bridge because of the racetrack only varies 1/8 of an inch on any long straightaway, and that you couldn't put anything on the racetrack once it was built. And that you couldn't drive a crane on it, you couldn't do anything. So we had to figure out how to get the bridge built quickly and in place before they put the first coat down on the racetrack. So we asked Anish who he uses to build these structures, and there's a company outside of Amsterdam that makes ships that builds all his pieces for him. So we flew to Amsterdam, and we said, can you build this thing in 16 weeks? And they said, no way in hell. And so we said, okay, we have 12, and we got them on board, and they built this bridge in 5 pieces, and they put it on a ship and brought it. We had to dredge the canal deeper so that they could bring it up to the site, and then unloaded it right on site, and then put the 5 pieces in place and welded it together while the grid shell was being erected around it. It was a nightmare, but it all moved forward as we did. So this is a good image of the complexity of the structure to build the structure. I mean, it was intense. At the same time all this was happening, we were working with Philips Lighting to develop a whole new lighting technology for the nodes, because there wasn't a light that could actually withstand the heat of the desert and be operated 24 hours a day. These lights do run it in the day, and you can actually see them because there's a frit pattern on the glass, and the color light washes across the frit. So the building actually changes color even in the day a little bit. So we had to work with Philips to develop a whole new light housing with Billings-Jackson and a bunch of others, so more professionals. Anyway, by the time it was completed, we had all new light technologies, new glass manufacturing technologies, new bridge. I mean, just to give you guys an idea of scale, you know Zaha's ski slope project? This is double the size of that, and we built it in 16 weeks, like installed in 16 weeks. Pretty crazy. It's 62 meters long. It's a 2-story facility, and it's got a restaurant and a bar and a nightclub, and then on the second level is a lounge with a concierge desk for VIP check-in. And so there's a separate VIP lobby down here that they go up into the bridge. Swimming pools on the roof, on both roofs. It's just an insane project with an insane timeline, but you can get an idea for the light nodes and stuff. So this project was all about speed and reacting to changes quickly without any time, right? We had no time to make long decisions, but we held true to a design idea and then did whatever we could to make that idea happen. It happened very fast. When that project ended, Sheikh Mohammed was doing a project for himself in his Sea Palace, which is just 5 miles down the road. And Thomas Lacer had won that project. And Hanny said to Thomas, you know, you should just have Mick come help you now. So he had worked with Sheikh Mohammed on the hotel, have him work on this project. Because this project was actually just as crazy because it had no money, no budget. He was building a greenhouse. The program was he wanted a greenhouse so that he could have Obama come and he could give him apples that he grew for Obama. That was the program. And I don't know if you guys know what it takes to grow apples, but it's called vernalized biome. And vernalized, you have to simulate winter so that you can make the trees hardy so they can produce the fruit for apples. It's not a regular biome. It's not like a tropical biome where you have orchids growing or something. That's easy. That's nothing compared to apples. So that made the complexity of the project go up, tenfold. He imagined that he wanted just greenhouses, like in Poland. Poland's the largest country with the most greenhouses. Miles and miles and miles of these just standard kind of army tent greenhouses. But we really had this idea that the data that we could collect about what a plant needs and what space it needs and what air volume and what light volume it needs could be the thing that drives the shape. So we started doing a series of studies, and this is actually the final design, but I can tell you how we got to here. So the undulating roof and the shapes are derived from both the efficiency of the air blowing from the outside ring in, so we could control the air speed across all of the plants, as well as changing where the light is coming in. And I'll talk briefly about what that means. So there's 3 different biomes. The amenity area is also the vernalized biome, which is the winter biome. And we kept that the smallest and on the north to get the less sun so that it could handle the winter climate. And Mediterranean and tropical kept getting more of the light. We're down to the south and southwest. Majlis, I don't know if there's a whole other complexity of this project because Majlis is where the families go and hang out and have tea and pray and just meet. So the men's Majlis is a cigar bar, basically, and the women's Majlis is where the women and the kids and the play and everything happens. So the program's completely different. This is like a men's club, and this is like a daycare center. But so we had to design a system that would work for both and a path that would get to both. So we began by looking at what the topography of all the different plant types for each of the different conditions, the different tropical, Mediterranean, and vernalized. And then we looked at the required volume of air and above each plant. So some trees need 3 meters above them of airflow, and others could have no space above them for airflow. And we basically created this hybrid topo. So this diagram is the difference topography. This is the difference between the ground and the roof. So the interior undulates and the roof undulates, but they don't undulate together. So you have moments where there's a pinch and moments where there's a great expanse. And so the design really came from, we took a list of over 50 plants per biome and created a plan and a roof form that related to the needs of each specific plant. Now I'll say we, again, this isn't just Lisa, that we had Grant Associates. You may know them from doing the project in Singapore that just opened, the great gardens there. So they're like the preeminent landscape designers. So they helped us figure out plant type, airflow, sun needs, water needs, and everything. And in the end, it resulted in the layout and plan, which is specific to all the different plant types, as well as the different Majlis configurations. And you can see that we started to move things. So it actually didn't work to have women's Majlis in the vernalized because of where we needed the airflow. So what began in one biome moved as the programmatic needs changed. And that resulted in these 3 biomes with these different undulating plans and levels. And then there's a ramp up the middle, which gives you access to all 3 biomes. It's interesting because the ramp that goes around also was required that Sheikh Mohammed could drive his golf cart all the way to the roof. So because he's not going to walk through here. So the entire building had to be done on a pitch that would allow the golf cart to get to the roof, and that once he got to the roof, he originally wanted a running track around the outer edge, but because of the topography that we created, he was okay with it being a hiking path, because there's a couple steep areas, so it no longer became a running track. He wouldn't ever use it anyway for a running track. But the details are interesting. So the idea of the track actually gave us an opportunity. So we could put all the HVAC systems under this EPDM clad ring around the building, which would protect it from 150-degree temperatures in the desert, and allow us to use ETFE panels, these pillows like the Beijing Aquatic Center, for the rest of the structure. So both the walls and the roof are inflatable pillows. What we did, though, with the ETFE was we actually worked with the manufacturer and developed a new ETFE pillow that could withstand the heat, but we also added an extra layer to it. They already had ETFE pillows that could have 4 layers, and the middle 2 layers have a frit pattern as well, and the 2 frit patterns could be offset, so you could have dots and holes, and that if you deflate the pillows, they close and create an opaque surface, so that if you needed light in, you inflate the pillow and the light would shine through, and as soon as you needed to control the sunlight, you just close the pillow, you deflate. So every pillow has a separate motor to inflate and deflate these pillows. So then we had to figure out what orientation allowed that to be optimized. So the original project had a grid, you saw in some of the early renderings, where the grid of the pillows were all the same, but it worked better for controlling the sun angle to now create a different structural system for each biome. So we had to work then with A10 as the HVAC, and then we had Arup and others on the structural to figure out a system that could work for this ETFE system. So it was a complete change to the program. Believe it or not, this is on a really tight budget compared to Yaz. But the ETFE is a really light system, which also allowed us to have the structural system light, because pillows are pretty light, as you can imagine. So this project really evolved out of that. And lastly, a boring plan. The HVAC system was the most fascinating thing because the entire basement of this thing was HVAC. And we actually used the underground for like a raised floor, like in an IT room. So not only did we have all the HVAC ring going around the building, but we were cooling the floors to cool the dirt so that the soil wouldn't evaporate as fast and we could control the water that way. So it's a fascinating HVAC distribution system that A10 worked out for us. But again, this entire project evolved out of what was the plants needed, not what Sheikh Mohammed needed. We got him his apples. It's about 80% done now. It's in construction right now. So, digital. So like you saw on the diagonal grid, I bounced around a lot doing architecture and digital. I like to think that a lot of the digital work was architectural in some way. So Guggenheim.com, as you can imagine, was a lot of architecture. We were doing Guggenheim.com, this is old, in 99 and 2000, at the heyday of the .com days, with Frank directly and Hanny about Bilbao and launching the new website at the same time and capturing what Guggenheim was about, as well as their new facilities, including what was being done in Vegas at the time with REM. So we were doing a lot of work around that. My role at RGA is interesting because you saw the diagonal end at Bob Greenberg and the line going across to Henry Smith Miller. Bob is an architect fanatic, architecture fanatic. Maybe architect fanatic is better. He likes architects. He's currently doing a home upstate with Toshiko Mori, and he's done 2 lofts with Henry Smith Miller, and he's got vacation homes by other architects. And so he likes architecture and working with architects. So I had worked with Henry Smith Miller way back in SciArc in '92, and stayed in touch with him. And then when I went to work for RGA, there was an obvious connection there. So Bob's always wanted to bring some sort of architectural component into the digital work. And just a brief overview of RGA, it's over 30 years old. It started in film. They've won Academy Awards for like special effects for Alien and World According to Garp. The baby floating in the air was digital. They did all that kind of stuff. And over time, they went from digital film to digital effects in commercials to becoming a complete ad agency, to web, when that became the hot thing, to now the latest trend is called functional integration. It's like, how do you merge it all together? How do you do ad campaigns, websites, apps, product design? So we do like Nike fuel bands. We design the fuel band and the ecosystem around it, and the apps, the thing on your iPhone, all that's RGA. And so we try to go to all the clients and say, look, we can do a little bit of everything for you and touch a little bit of everything on your brand. So Windows 8 was an interesting project because this was my first project with RGA. I had just joined, and it was for the Windows 8 launch. And they came to us and said, we understand you did the American Eagle sign. I don't know if you guys know the big American Eagle sign in Times Square, but it's the one you can get your picture on it. And can you help us with a takeover of Times Square for the Windows 8 launch? We have a new Microsoft Surface store, and we want to have some sort of launch event in Times Square, and we'd like it to be big. So, obviously we said yes, we'll do it. And what's fascinating about what's required by that is you might think, okay, signs in Times Square, that's easy, or it's trivial, but it's really complex. So there's over 60 signs in Times Square. We could only get access to 39, and of those 39 signs, They're owned by 8 different companies, all on 8 different servers. They have their own computer systems, their own computer setup. And how do you sync that? How do you create content for those? How do you create events around those? So with Windows 8, we were trying to create a system that would take advantage of that. This is just to give you an idea of the screens and the disbursement of the screens. So there's obviously screens on some of these buildings that are blank, but we didn't have access to those. You know, they're private, or they one's got the Coca-Cola logo on it, you know, and never changes. And so we had to take what we could get. So we took as many screens as we could get. Of all 39 screens, only 2 screens have a direct hard line into them. American Eagle has an HDMI port on it right here. And the Reuters sign down at the other end has an HDMI port on the roof, so you could put a table up there and plug into it. So how do you create an interactive experience for somebody? And it's actually 2 million people, but how do you create an interactive experience for 2 million people when you only have one hardline access to the screens? So we had to write a whole series of applications that would allow us to take advantage of the environment that we were in, but also with the caveat that we had some problems we had to deal with. So how do you create an experience that allotted for delay, time delay? So we had to come up with this concept of how the screens are going to jump around and how the content would jump around. And then how do you make it interactive to specific things about Windows 8? Most of you probably know about Windows 8, and its interface is really iPad-ish and touch-oriented. Some limitations to the kind of the business features of it because of that, but that's really the direction they wanted to go. So they wanted to highlight these things. So how easy it is to Skype and play games, and Angry Birds, and all that stuff. And how do we demonstrate that to the public, again, in an easy, quick way? So we were showing them first how we had to coordinate the signs with some sort of time delay system. So we were working on how that works and how that manifests around Times Square. Second, we had to look at all of the screens and where they were in relationship to the ground. Now, granted, I'm still just talking about screens. We haven't started talking about the ground yet. We'll get to the ground. But how do you coordinate all of the content on the different screens? So we generated storyboards for all the different screens and what kind of content they could handle based on refresh rates and input and different computer systems. So half the systems were Mac, 2 were Linux, and the rest were PC-based. That was another big issue because we couldn't have one of the systems crash and show a Mac logo for a Windows 8 launch. So we actually had to create a backup system for all screens that would crash a PC logo, which was, so you're creating a backup crash, really. But it's just little things like that. And so then we had all these screens. We had the idea of how we could get them coordinated. And then we had to figure out what the actual ground activation elements were. So we worked with Microsoft on deciding what these things should be and how do you engage people with the limited areas that we have on the site. And then what do we need to do that? So we created apps for all of the workstations. So instead of it being the standard apps that you see, it had to look like Windows 8, but we actually created our own Windows 8. So we hacked Windows 8, and we created our own version of FreshPaint, and our own version of Skype, and our own version of Angry Birds that would allow us to tap into the user's experience but time delay it. So we created a time delay Angry Birds. So you'd go like this, and it would react differently and slowly. So we had these kind of hacked versions. It was great. We ended up having Angry Birds and FreshPaint programmers, originators, come to the event to find out how we did it, because we had hacked into FreshPaint so that we could allow artists to do things that FreshPaint didn't do, like copy-paste. You can't copy-paste in FreshPaint, so we hacked a system so we could do that. So we created all these apps, and then we created all these workstations. This is just a snapshot of the rendering we did to show them what we were doing, but we had to create something that was scalable and they could also take with them. It's kind of like the gates, right, to be honest. It's just some sort of workstation. There's 20 of these, though. This is going down 4 blocks. And each of the stations had some sort of interactivity around the Times Square. And I'll just jump ahead so you guys can see that. So forgive me for cheesy music, but I do work for an ad agency. I will mute it after it starts. but we put together a reel that actually showed all the interactivity. It's not too loud, is it? But the key here is to actually, you'll see not only the scale of the takeover, but also you'll see the interactivity. So you'll see artists painting and it's reacting. When you see some of the hand swipes, it's actual hands swiping. We had rigged cameras on these workstations to film both the hands manipulating the screens as well as with the content on the screen. So you can see she's playing Fruit Ninja and it's happening on the big board. So you could compete against friends on the other end of Times Square. So you could be at one station and competing against someone on the other end. It was actually a great event. Let me hit mute. So, but all these apps you see them playing are variations on the apps that are on the system. We had to create all these things to create this experience. We also did all of the digital content you see on the screens. So it may seem easy, but it's really complex because every screen's a different aspect ratio. They're not all 4:3 or 16:9. They're all these odd configurations. So we had to generate separate content. Took over a week of rendering time on a render farm to get all the digital content exported and scaled to all 39 screens. So it was an intense project, and this project from start to finish, including construction of those 20 stands and the writing of the software, was 12 weeks. So it's fast and furious in agency world. But it was an interesting problem. How do you solve for 2 million visitors without letting them know that you had to solve for anything? Because they didn't know they were using custom stations. They didn't know that they were using hacked computers. They didn't know that the video delay was being created from a new software. So it was an interesting problem. How do you create an experience that no one knows is kind of micromanaged like that? So that's just a sample of the digital. The last thing I want to show is actually something that I'm working on the side. I like to keep my hands in architecture. You know, you sometimes feel like you've sold out when you do the digital work. I find it very fascinating, and the data visualization and the data collection and the what's happening. Oh, I should go on a little side tangent about RGA real quick because there's some fascinating stuff. So only because Mark touched on it briefly. The interesting thing about what we're doing now is, and it's happening really fast. We're leapfrogging over technology really quickly. Doing Microsoft Windows 8, we started working with Microsoft a lot, as you can imagine. So we got access to their Connect team, and they have an SDK, a software developer kit, which anyone can get. But we were working with them directly, so they actually kind of let us behind the curtain so we could see how things actually work. So we've now hacked into Connect systems, so we can have unlimited Connects hardwired together, and we can use, each Connect can see 6 people, and of those 6 people, it can look at 5 objects on your body, so torso, head, arms, legs, or if you have a bag flowing, it'll read that kind of thing. And we can also track 5 colors, so each object can have a color. And we can look at glance technology, so if you're walking one way but look this way, we can tell which way you're looking. We can do gender with an 85% accuracy, and we can do age with a 10-year swing accuracy. So that's pretty good accuracy. We can, if you frown, you're 10 years older, and if you smile, you look younger, just digitally. I mean, I'm not making that up. The computer thinks you're younger if you smile. So what's amazing about that is what we're using that for. So we're using that recognition not for scary 1984 stuff, but actually, what does that mean for the smart home as we know it today isn't what it's going to be. It's not, I'm going to control my weather, my temperature in my room or turn on lights. It's going to be linked to a system that's actually figuring out what everyone wants and what everyone needs. So you can take all of these data inputs and all of this tracking stuff and figure out, how many people are walking on this side of the street or that side of the street. Are they actually looking where they're going? Do we need a different traffic light system? Do we need a different sound system for that? We're working with Arup on some projects now that use this technology for identifying better traffic patterns in Doha so that you can see who's driving at different times, not just who's driving. So instead of just looking at there's traffic or no traffic, you can start to see, okay, well, if there's a lot of people here every time of the day, is it because they're taking their kids to school, or there's a sale, or what's happening? And we can do long-term tracking, so we can do data analysis, yearly, biannually, that kind of stuff, and really look at flows and take that information and predict how traffic patterns are going to change and encourage different uses in those areas and actually alert. So you can send private alerts to everybody saying you might want to take a different route because school's getting out. You can there's a sale at the mall, you can go this way. So we can get specific data that's smart and predictive and not just yes or no things like we currently have, on, off kind of thing. So that said, so I'm working on this project in New Harmony, Indiana. I don't know if anyone knows New Harmony, but it has an amazing history. It's a town of 800 people, plus or minus. That plus or minus shifts over the last 100 years by maybe 80 people. It's a very small town in southern Indiana. That's the Wabash River. The Wabash goes south and hits the Ohio River, which then goes all the way back up to Pittsburgh. So just to give you a bearing, it's the tip of Indiana, the southern tip. In its history, in the late 1700s, Father Rapp founded New Harmony, and it was a religious sect that believed the end of the world was coming. So they believed in celibacy, and they didn't believe in having children, and the only one that could have relations with the woman was Father Rapp. It was a cult, and eventually it became so successful as a trading post that he wanted to sell because he was losing control of the town. So he sold the town to Robert Owen, who is a socialist reformer from Scotland, New Lanark, Scotland. And he had these mills in Scotland where he actually believed in good working conditions. I mean, it was cutting edge for 1810, 1809. So he bought the town, and he decided that he wanted to make a utopia after Thomas More's Utopia. Let me give you a little brief shot here. There's the view of Richard Meyer's Athenaeum, which I'll talk about in a minute, and the site. And the town is 200 cars, 200 golf carts, and 777 people. So he wanted to create this utopia. Many of you may have seen this image from your schooling days. I had this in school. He modeled it after Thomas More's Utopia. You live on the wall, you work inside, you study inside. It's not religion-based. There was a spiritual base to it, but he believed that everyone should be able to do what they want and practice what they want, so there was not one single religion. It was heavily science-based, so he brought all these scientists from around the world. So there was German botanists and French philosophers and Austrian teachers and British socialists, sociologists, and just an interesting mix of people. And he went before Congress and proposed his utopia and announced that he would create the perfect place, and got on the boatload of knowledge in Pittsburgh and rowed the boat down to the Wabash and took a barge up the Wabash and went to their new town. It didn't last very long. The utopia didn't last very long. But a lot of the things that happened there lasted. So it was the first women's organization in the U.S., the first kindergarten in the U.S. It's the home of the USGS, which we all use for architecture. A lot of things happened in this little town. So it has this rich history, and the utopia failed, but the town still kind of lingered. One of the interesting things that existed in the town in its history was the labyrinth. So because it wasn't based on any single religion, there was a lot of fringe spiritual practices that were being done at an early time, which was fascinating for the time. So two labyrinths emerged in the town 180 years ago that they believe were spiritual walks. And today, even people walk these labyrinths as spiritual walks. Some believe it can cause illness, and so people go on these journeys to different labyrinths to walk them. So the Chartres Cathedral Labyrinth is located in town on this large stone. It's a flat you walk on the plains, and then the maze labyrinth is on the south edge of town. Still maintained to this day. They still use these. They're just tourist attractions now, but the University of Southern Indiana maintains all the historic sites. So this became an important part of their history. So Jane Owen, Robert Owen's granddaughter by marriage, her maiden name was Blafford, and she was the Blafford of Blafford in Houston that funds Rice University and the DeMenil Foundation, and she came from Texaco. So Jane was dating Rockefeller in college at UT and fell in love with a track star named Ken Owen. So she ditched Rockefeller for a farmer from New Harmony and fell in love with the town. So it's important to the story because Jane moved to New Harmony in 1962, and from then on, she's the one that really made New Harmony happen. So she hired Richard Meyer to do his first cultural project, so the Athenaeum was his first museum. Philip Johnson's Roofless Church, again, in a town of 800. It's a fascinating place. And then if you walk through the woods, there's all these amazing Tillich art pieces in the middle of the woods. They're just in the trees, in the woods, on the ground, in the middle of the forest. It's an interesting place because of Jane Owen. Well, she passed away at 99 years old 2 years ago. So the town has a bicentennial coming up in 2 years, and they want to do something significant, but they don't have Jane to back it. And Jane's children don't live there and don't want to back it. So how do you do a project for a town that doesn't have a benefactor anymore? So the town still has the desire to do great things, but it's changed. So instead of a one person doing the project, it takes everybody to do the project. So we started looking at the town and what that means for the project. So we have a site on the corner of the town. And we first looked at what all the historic sites were, because the project for this landmark, it's just something to celebrate the 200 years. They wanted to mark the occasion. So we wanted something that would reference the historic sites. That's the labyrinth, for example, down here. This is an old park, and there's an old lodge here that's been there forever. This is the school that's closed, no longer in operation. And there's a lot of things. The Working Men's Institute, which is where Owen had all his scientists come study. There's actually a great lab here that was the basis for the design of the Smithsonian Castle. Even the stonework on this was the stone they decided to use for the castle. And the Smithsonian bill, the bill passed to actually enact the Smithsonian, was done by the senator from Indiana that was living in New Harmony at the time. So the architecture of the Smithsonian was also chosen by him because he was head of the committee. So he used his architect to build the castle. It's just kind of a little history note for you. And then these are significant historic homes that existed in New Harmony's time of Robert Owen, and still have significant activity on them today. So we went through the town and kind of identified these things. Pretty basic stuff, but you guys get the idea, right? So we just really shrunk this down to the site and created a kind of microcosm of the town. And as one-liner as it may seem, we looked at the labyrinth because they were interested in the labyrinth and thought about this idea of two separate paths instead of one because of the need to have, because they wanted to go up. Originally it started out as a lookout tower. They wanted an observation tower to be able to look down on the town. And we thought it'd be interesting to come up with an idea that was more about their past and incorporate some elements of their past. So if we have a vertical element, there's issues with fire, safety, and exit and everything. So we created two paths at a 1 to 20 slope that meet at different points along the way for egress. And we took the pattern of the town and put that on the site and created 777 columns so that we could fund this project by individual investment of all of the residents. We know that not every resident will invest, but we also know that SABIC, which is GE Plastics, sold to Saudi Arabia, is going to invest in a little bit, and there's an oil refinery that will invest in a little bit. But the idea that Mark Linder could buy one column, Randall could buy one column. That's the idea, is that we can sponsor certain columns. And it was a way to get the town embracing the idea of kind of private development of the project, since we didn't have Jane anymore. This is the response to no Jane. So we took the pattern of the town's sites and created this 777 columns, and then meandered each labyrinth through that. Again, the complexity of the ramp is because of the 1 to 20 slope, so that we didn't have to have any kind of steps, fire exits. And there's the second path, and we combine those together to create the project. It's just a steel grate with a polymer plastic side panel that Sabic is looking at providing. So we have the columns provided by the town, the panels provided by the local corporations, and steel decking provided by Evansville Sheet Metal. So there's the project's pretty simple, actually. It just offers 4 vantage points to the town. There's the Rappite Cemetery, which is pre-New Harmony, pre-Owenite. A view to the Sharts Labyrinth this way. We created an opening so that you could see the old bridge here and the view of Richard Myers Athenaeum and Philip Johnson's church there. 2 different entry points. It says in and out, but it's 2 entries and exits. One from the street and one from historic New Harmony. There's historic homes here that are operated by USI, and this is a private path to those homes. So you could have 2 different ways in and out of the project. So there it is rendered with the red polymer plastic panels. And this is an idea of how it sits on the site. So there's the Sharts Labyrinth, Richard Myers Athenaeum, Philip Johnson's church. This is also a Richard Meyer project that never gets published. It's a little potter studio. It's peach. It's not white. It's like one of his only 9 non-white buildings. These are all historic harmonious homes. This is the Smithsonian lab here. It's got a little turret just like the castle. It's a fascinating little town. And then here's the experience. So I'm sure you've seen the little flyer in the hallways, but it just creates this kind of dense experience that then opens up at each of the landing points to create the vertical labyrinth in New Harmony, Indiana for their bicentennial. So that's the last project that I have, but just in summary, I think the work is interesting. It's on an interesting trajectory. I'm not there yet. I'm still number 2, right? But I think what I'm finding is that there is an overlap in the way that the data is collected on how the projects evolve and what you do with it on the next project. So where I might be interested in population and making habitable spaces for a city versus what happens when you do a small town. This doesn't have the problems of 1992 LA. They just don't have that in New Harmony, Indiana. Good or bad, right? So it's just understanding what the different parameters are and trying to figure out what the factors are that are appropriate to the project, and then how do you generate something that could be used by all. And that's, I think, what the interesting overlap is between the physical and the digital work that I'm currently doing. So that's all I have on the vertical labyrinth. Do you guys have any questions about any of this or any of the other stuff that I'm doing or digital work? Yep. None? All right, well, thanks everyone for having me.
That was great.
Thanks.
I liked the first slide.